Hi everyone, good to see you. A very short recap of where we are. We are in the heart of the 19th century area of Tbilisi, capital of Georgia. And as you can see, this house looks very European because it is kind of the very European area. We call it a German colony. And many houses here used to belong to Germans starting from mid 19th century or were built by German architects and engineers. So we could say that this is the probably the best symbol of the area of the history of this land of Tbilisi. It's hard to say. Well, by looking at this photo, well, it's hard to imagine, right, that we are somewhere in the heart of the Caucasus, but the Caucasus is a diverse region. And Tbilisi is the history with very interesting, it's a city with a very interesting history, faith, and stories. So diverse. And that's on my tours. I'm trying to show Tbilisi in its full beauty, in its complexity. So I'm using this tour as just a platform to tell the world about Georgia, which is still, I would say, very undiscovered and unspoiled country. So yeah, basically, as I said, the house is also a museum of theater, music, cinema, and choreography of Georgia. So not only are we talking about the Oldenburgs, to whom the palace belonged at some point for actually a short period of time, but also we're talking about the museum and the exhibit there. So it was built by Paul Stern, one of the people who lived in the German colony. Sorry, what are you looking for, Grisha? You're looking for a tablet. I'm not sure if it's here. No, I don't think it's here. Try looking elsewhere, okay? Hassan is looking for his tablet. I'm so sorry. He was just going back and forth, really getting on my nerves. And the interiors were, by the way, designed by a Polish architect. So you see, Tbilisi was a kind of an international hub. So the Rogojski was originally from Poland. And the house was built, by the way, for a Swiss family, believe it or not. And then it was purchased by Duke Constantine Oldenburg and his wife Agripina Japaridze or Agripina Dadiani. So she married Duke Oldenburg after her husband passed away. And the story of how they got together, the story of their life is all, I would say, surrounded with lots of rumors, lots of dodgy stories, and we're going to explore that shortly. However, it's only a legend which is abused largely by local tour guides because it adds the spice, right? So I know that there is this, well, I would say there is this attitude of tour guides sometimes don't ruin a good story with facts, but I mean, I don't mind legends as long as you inform your tourists that this is just a legend and there are some facts that you cannot simply just sweep under the carpet. So I'm not going to do that, but we're going to talk about it a little later. And we still have a lot to talk about before we get down to this story. So the tour is built, and the previous episode is available on my YouTube channel still. You know where to find it on my website. Through my website, you can access all the recordings. And we haven't walked around the house yet, so we are going to also walk in the small garden in one of the final episodes. But so far, we are focusing on the interiors. And as I said, this house all belonged to the Oldenburgs only for a short period of time. But because this is the photo taken in 1916, and this was already at that time an office of the Vysotsky Tea Company. So the house was not taken away from the Oldenburgs. And just some photos, very few photographs of this neighborhood. Well, you see that the house used to be way smaller, and this pink building to the right-hand side from the building was added actually after the revolution in the 1930s. So it used to be way smaller. However, it was indeed extended to the Commission of Oldenburg himself because the house was a bit too small for the growing family of Oldenburgs of Zarnikau. We are now in the living room. It's important to remember that there are no really memorial items that belong to the Oldenburgs because they moved out before that. The Duke Constantine Oldenburg passed away from cancer in 1908, and shortly after that, the widow Zarnikau sold the house. And but after the restoration, it was decided to recreate the interiors with the furniture contemporary to the times the Oldenburgs lived there, which is the early 1900s, the end of the 20th century. And you can see here the antique furniture, and along with that, also a lot of exhibits related to the theater life, cinema, and I would say Georgian culture in general. So, I mean, it's very, I would say I can easily imagine the Oldenburgs having dinner in this very room. By the way, this is Agripina Japaridze herself. This is her photo. By the way, quite a rare portrait. And well, that's her. I think you can easily recognize her in that photograph. But that there are not so many photographs left of them. So I would say every photo is a rarity. Speaking of the theater, speaking of Georgian culture, for example, Georgian theater is celebrated in this museum. Georgian theater, which I mean the plays written in Georgian language and played in Georgian language, that's a big deal. And we can say that even amidst the Russian occupation, that well, I mean, not the current situation. You know, Georgians believe that 20% of Georgian territory is occupied by Russia. Well, I'm talking about the Imperial Russia, right? So I'm talking about the times of the Russian Empire. And starting from 1801, that's exactly how things were. So the Russian Empire took over Georgia. And having a Georgian theater in the Georgian language at that time was a big deal. In mid 19th century, that's exactly how it happened. And the David Aristov was one of the writers and playwright who shaped the Georgian theater scene in general and theater culture. So this is the performance poster made in silk. It was from Kutaisi, which is one of the cities in Georgia, which was, by the way, the first city I live streamed from when I came. So David Eristavi or Aristov. Obviously, Aristov is the name, kind of a Russianized version of it. And of course, all Georgians, well, those who got education, they had to, and also Georgian nobility, they had to speak Russian. And originally, the theater was only in Russian. But starting from mid 19th century, as I said, Georgian having a George theater, not created, but kind of given another birth, that revival. That was a big deal, and it was it's something that is still remembered. And some plays are still performed in the theaters, the same plays that were running more than 100 years ago, which I believe is quite is quite good and lovely. So obviously there are a lot of items here, a lot of portraits of actors related to Georgian theater history. I'm just going to go briefly about some of the important things, also some of the people that might be familiar to you from my previous tours, and also we can focus on the interiors. So the interiors, it's the example of the historic restoration, scientific restoration, and here we see items, the exhibits related to the history of Georgian drama theater. You all remember an opera theater, so you all remember the opera theater in the Rustaveli Avenue, built in the Moorish style that looks to many of you, I know that building actually reminds of a synagogue, and same here, I should admit. However, the first opera theater looked like that, and it was located in a slightly different area in the current around the current Liberty Square, which is not really a big deal, but Well, you may remember it from my previous tour, but it's not really that much relevant to this tour. And that's what it looked like. The very first opera theater was built by an Italian architect, Giovanni Scudieri, and he's one of those Europeans who came to Georgia because it was a very quickly developing region during the times of the Russian Empire. Well, Georgia went through the period of, I would say, incredible growth, and Tbilisi was made the center, the capital of the entire Caucasian region, and lots of banks, lots of investment were just rushed into Tbilisi, and a lot of foreigners, foreign experts in different fields came and stayed in Tbilisi. We know of a lot of them, even the Siemens brothers themselves. But well, Giovanni Scudier was one of those Italian architects who came to work and actually stayed here for good. Well, he built a lot of buildings, and not only buildings. For example, this is the famous dry bridge. We walked it quite a number of times, and well, it was built by Giovanni Scudieri. I haven't been able to find any portrait of Scudieri, unfortunately. And this is the exhibit from the museum collection. These are the blueprints of the very first opera theater in Tbilisi. Big deal, really big deal. That theater unfortunately burned down. It's still a question whether it was an arson or just well, natural cause. This is the curtain design for one of the plays in their regional theater. Well, in the first theater, but anyway, it is what it is. And obviously, the theater was built to the federal, well, not the federal, but the Imperial money. So the Romanovs gave the permission and sponsored the construction of the theater. And the furniture, gorgeous. Again, the same period. Also, as far as I've been told, that some of the items belong to the Dadiani family because Agrippina Japaridze actually came from the Dadiani family. It's one of the ruling dynasty. It's one of the royal dynasties in Georgia, and that's why in the previous episodes we spoke quite a lot about her brother, Prince Dadiani, who was a chess player and also avid art collector. We spoke about his mother and a lot of stories of Dadiani family in general. And here in this house, we have some items that belong to the Dadiani family members, and also a lot of artworks are from the Dadiani family collection. This is kind of a shout out, well, to those who watched my previous tours and well of this house. And if you have not watched it, the previous episode is available. If you want to see the all the other several episodes I've done before that, there is a way to do that. Well, there is a membership option. The details are on the chat. And in this very living room, you see the portraits of some important characters. But before we get down to the characters, and I promise that this tour will be anyway centered around Duke Constantine and his wife Agrippina, but it's not only that. So first of all, let's talk about the furniture. Well, the furniture here, especially the furniture exactly under the portrait, it belonged to Jakub Gogebashvili. Jakub Gogebashvili was the founder of so-called, well, the scientific pedagogy. He was a teacher, an educator, or also writer, children's writer, and he built his entire career. He centered his life all around the Georgian language and making sure Georgian kids, alongside learning Russian language, which was an obligatory thing, they would not forget the Georgian language and master the language and read interesting literature in the Georgian language. So, for example, he is the author of the Dadaena, which is, well, Dadaena is translated from Georgian as the mother tongue. So basically, in the current ABC and alphabet books of Georgia, actually in the base of it, in the core of it, lies the story done by Jakub Gogebashvili about the Georgian language. Yeah, so in this furniture, well, was after he passed away, and that is his burial place, he left his property to the city, to an educational society that he created, kind of a educational fund. And this is how the furniture from his house is now part of the museum collection in this palace. This is the furniture I'm talking about. And in the center, above the sofa, we can see the portrait of Agrippina Japaridze. However, this is a modern portrait created, I believe, for this particular palace, but I'm not entirely sure. But it's clearly a modern one. But it is surrounded with a lot of 19th century exhibits and illustrations. For example, you can see a gramophone from the 19th century. I'm not sure whether it is in the working condition. Unlike the gramophone we saw in the previous tour in the old St. Petersburg apartment. Also, here we see exhibits related to the theater life of Georgia, and I cannot but share it with you. For example, here, and by the way, check out also the stained glass windows. This is the new stained glass, and unfortunately, the stained glass, none of the stained glass survived the 20th century, the turmoil of the 20th century. Also during the Soviet period, at some point there was an orphanage in the house in the adjacent building, right? The extension that was built in the 20th century, this pink building that we saw from the outside. Well, but in the later Soviet period in the 90s, the house was absolutely neglected. Obviously, it was looted for sure. The interiors were just just dilapidating. The house was in a very bad condition, and it we could have lost it. We could have lost it. It's just the work, the hard effort, the energy of the current director of the museum, and also the elites of Georgia, because of a lot of generous donations coming from the private businesses and enterprise. And here in this last case, we have the costumes. They are the costumes of late 19th century, early 20th century, by the way, and they were designed by Revaz Mirzashvili. I'm sorry, this is the only photo I was able to find online. Rivaz Mirzashvili, I don't really think that a lot of Georgians even know what he looked like. He was the designer, the setting designer. He was the one of the visual artists that worked for Georgian theater, and then mostly switched to Georgian cinema, starting from 1920s and 1930s. And he continued his work throughout the Soviet period, actually up until his death. And Rivaz Mezashvili created a lot of visual designs, a lot of costumes for some of the most fundamental, iconic Georgian movies. And he was also just an artist. He created, I really like this watercolors. I'm pretty sure I have been on such a balcony. It was created for one of the films. I think it's just a lovely work. I would say, a typical Georgian balcony. It has a lot of air, very warm light. So I think it's just a work of art. However, it was never really exhibited. It was just one of the sketches, one of the designs for one of the movies he worked on in the Soviet period. But it's, lovely as it is. And also, I have prepared a little episode that I downloaded from a screen recorded from YouTube. So I forgot to enable. I just wanted to make sure that I have enabled the function so you could be able to hear this. So I need to go back a little bit. Yeah, I think from here it's okay. Uh, Since I don't really have a lot of opportunities to share with you the story of Georgian cinema, and I don't expect you to know much about Georgian cinema, and whenever possible, I'm trying to include, at least something to share with you. And also, he was a costume designer, and this is one of the garments that was used in one of the movies, restored, and I haven't seen it in the museum collection, so it may be in some other museum. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's just absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to share with you a short episode from a movie called The Wishing Tree by Georgian director Tengiz Abuladze. It's one of the most important movies of the 20th century, very philosophical. It tells the story of a life in a Georgian village after the revolution. And there's a lot of this. I would say that maybe in a way it's similar to the Cherry Orchard by Chekhov and how people are trying to survive the changes, the drastic changes, right? And we're going to see the episode where one of the characters um, a former aristocrat who has lost everything after the revolution is trying to live in the new time, so to speak. And the way the film was made, the visual side of it, the costumes, that's all the work of Revaz Mezashvili. I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. And well, this film won a lot of international awards. So The Wishing Tree. Um, well, this is the one of the main characters. You can just pay attention to the costume, to the way she talks. There are English subtitles there.
Все золотую рыбку ищешь, Ильёс? Ищу, а как же? А змей не боишься? Тут ведь всякая нечисть водится. Что поделать? Без шипов розы не сорвешь. Ищи, ищи. Кто ищет, тот и находит.
You see, he's trying to catch a fish with a basket that has like no bottom in it, and she is holding it on just a parasol. Look at everything. So this was all, and it looks so atmospheric and so sad and so timid. So it's the Revaz Mirzashvili. And the name of the character is Bubala.
Здравствуйте, здравствуйте. Здравствуй, Фуфала. Хорошо, что появилась наконец. Где ты пропадала, Фуфала? Вот пришла, видит Бог, люблю я вас. О чем вы тут судачили? О бренной жизни нашей. Коротка она, наша жизнь. К примеру, хотя бы взять тебя. Говорят, красавицей была. Да, милый, не скрою. Красиво была, очень красиво. Златокудрая, черноглазая. Ласточкой меня называли. А теперь совой зовут. И на увядшую розу стала похожа. Хоть и увядшая, а все-таки роза. Не чита тебе, чесночная душа. Ты сейчас как цветущая роза. И женихов у тебя много, только стесняются они признаться тебе в любви. Про кого говоришь? Про этих нынешних обормотов с кувшинными жилами, со слиными мозгами? Не пойду я, дочь столбового дворянина, за первого встречного.
So you see, well, these ladies, they are already, it's kind of, they represent the modern times, right? The Soviet period in the village. And she clearly is, as she calls herself, withered rose. And she totally aware of that, that she is a withered rose, but she's still not losing hope to find the man that she loves. But she also says that she doesn't like the men around her nowadays. So it's just interesting to see this clash between the two very different cultures, the two very different epochs. Nevertheless, so I like this film a lot myself. I know it. I don't know that many Georgian films because I really don't have much time to watch movies, and I haven't really seen a lot of Georgian movies in general. But well, Misha, my husband and my colleague, he's a big fan of Soviet cinema and Georgian Soviet period as well. So he will definitely be doing a tour at some point about Georgian movies because there is a lot to talk about. Nevertheless, we go on, and also there are some artworks that I would really like to talk about. By the way, some of the paintings are from the, as I said, the private collection of the Dadiani family. Some of them, for example, are the copies. For example, this one, the, this painting is the copy. This is the copy of the original painting that you can find in the Moscow Tretyakov Gallery. We don't know who made this copy. But it also had well, kind of a number, and it used to be in the Tretyakov Gallery collection at some point, but it wasn't stolen or anything. It's just that the provenance after it was part of the Tretyakov collection, well, is a bit unclear. But the original is still in that museum. And there's one artwork that I would like to talk about since we are in the room, and this is this painting, 19th century. It has an interesting story and also interesting, I would say, political connotation. This painting was made by an Armenian artist who lived in Tbilisi, Arutin Shamshinov. The name of the painting is Kinoba, a Georgian mass folk performance. It's just I'm kind of giving an explanation what Kinoba is. Kinoba is one of the folk festivals held in Georgia well, ever since the Georgian times before the empire. And well, there are two of them, like Verika Oba, which I mentioned on my tours before, and the Kinoba. They are both like big village celebrations where people would dress up and wear masks, trying to show the vice of the people in the government or in a certain village. They're basically mocking, they're being satirical about certain characters or certain episodes in life, and well, so in particular in this situation, Arutin Shamshinov is depicting the well this Kinova festival and the visit of an Ottoman sheikh to Tbilisi, because as you know, Georgia for many centuries was torn between the Persian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, and obviously these both empires could not but have a big impact on the country. And that's why it's kind of interesting because on the one hand, it's clearly an Asian influence, and a lot of the Asian features and influence you can see in the architecture, but also it's a very Christian country, and the influence, the presence of the European culture, mainly left by the Russian Empire. Well, it's just because this is how things are. But also a lot of Europeans visiting the country and working in the city. Well, it's just an interesting combination, very unbeatable combo. To me, absolutely unmatched and amazing. That's what makes Georgia Georgia. And this artwork was, by the way, featured in the famous Google Arts and Culture project. But it made news in all the Georgian no, Georgian channels. So you can still find this artwork in this big Google Heritage project on the artworks of world arts and culture. So there's not much known about the artist himself, but I guess again the fact that it was an Armenian artist who lived in Georgia depicting a very Georgian ritual. I think it also speaks for itself how international Tbilisi was, and Armenians, in fact, um, the Armenian presence was very impressive in Georgia. Armenians, which I also mentioned a lot on my tours, were kind of monopolized in a way a big part of the trade sector in Tbilisi. Yes, a 19th century piano. I'm not sure about its provenance, whether it belonged to the Dadiani family or not. It's not really mentioned, but the entire vibe of the room clearly matches the times we're talking about. So speaking of the this room, there's one more thing I would like to mention before we get to the story of the Dadiani family itself. First and foremost, this portrait, as you can see here, it's the copy. Oh, by the way, on the wall you can see some original decoration, the irises. Right? You can see the iris flowers over there. I was told by the local historians that they really tried to restore the decorations, the irises on all the walls because all the walls were covered in these irises, but they could not. So the house was in a pretty bad condition, as I said. So they just left for us a little bit of the irises and the portrait of a woman in a hat. I'm sure you can recognize her as Mary Sherbashidze, who was obviously familiar with the Dadiani family. Dadiani and Sherbashidze were two royal dynasties, aristocratic dynasties. And Mary Rashidze was even a lady in waiting to Alexandra Feodorovna, the Russian empress. I gave you a detailed story of Rashidze's life and also her husband, Prince George Aristavi. They immigrated after the revolution, as I told you, first to Turkey, then to France. And in France, Mary Rashidze became the model for Coco Chanel, and many Georgian princesses became models for the haute couture uh, uh, designers in France. Well, anyway, it's just one of the stories I wanted to kind of remember. And the room itself, by the way, it's called the Iris Rooms because of the designs. Well, unfortunately, as I said, only a few elements they have left to us. So the lower section of the room had this, I'm not sure if it's a pear or some other. So the room, you just can't imagine how gorgeous the room must have looked. And well, it's time to keep the promises and speak about the Oldenburg. So also I was said that, for example, these writing utensils used to be on the desktop in the Dadiani family, and they could have been, by the way, also on the desktop of on the desk of Duke Constantine himself. So, as I said, I spoke about Constantine before in the previous tour when we visited his library. And yes, this is the paper knife, was part of that set that you can see in this glass box. Uh, so I spoke about his background, and that's originally well, Oldenburgs. They became related to the Romanovs in the 18th century. So Duke Constantine, he was raised. He spent quite a lot of time in Germany, and he was well educated, spoke several languages, and then he came to Russia. and he served Russia. So he was sent by the Romanovs to the Caucasus region to develop it, mainly the hospitals, educational centers, and he was sent to Kutaisi. Kutaisi was mm, how shall I put it? It eventually became the base for the Oldenburgs because this is where he worked for a while. He was busy creating the uh, building several hospitals and even a spa resort. One of the ideas of Oldenburg was to develop this region so that it would be attractive to international visitors. And he did a lot in this field, by the way. So this in Kutaisi, he was invited to a performance held in one of the royal homes, in one of the aristocratic homes, sorry, the Dadiani residence, and there was shown a performance of the Knight in the Panther Skin by Shota Rustaveli, and one of the actors was actually Agripina Japaridze. This is how they met. Agripina Japaridze, that's her. She was married at that time, and but they met. They were introduced to each other, and according to the account of the contemporaries, it was love at first sight. At least on Constantine's side, he wasn't married, and but she was, and that was originally it. She wasn't married. It wasn't a happy marriage, unfortunately. So her husband had a lot of vice. He was also a gambler and left her in debt after he passed away. You can see her in this photo. She's wearing black, like total black. And Georgians would wear black normally, especially for the official photographs, only when they were mourning. Georgian's color means a lot. As a linguist, I always pay attention to idioms, right? And well, in Georgian, there is an expression. It's called. It sounds like an araperi, which means without a color. But they actually say doesn't. It means doesn't matter. So when something doesn't have a color, it means it doesn't matter. So there's always a big importance given to a color in general. So she's wearing total black. That's clearly mourning. So her husband passed away, and the year her husband passed away, she was proposed by Constantine. We don't know whether they kept seeing each other, whether they kept seeing each other after they were introduced to in Kutaisi. But after he proposed, obviously a lot of rumors started spreading around the city of Kutaisi, and obviously those rumors made their way to Tbilisi when they decided to purchase a residence for themselves. So yes, some people would say that this house was built for by Oldenburg, which was not the case. We know that he had bought it from the previous owners, right? And the house was purchased because Agrippina asked him to build a house where they could see each other and have sex because they couldn't do it anywhere else. Like Agrippina didn't have anywhere to live, right? So there were a lot of stories. So that's why this palace is often referred to as the Palace of One Night. Another story, another dirty rumor was that her late husband, had lost her in a game of cards. He lost her to Duke Constantine, and that was the plan of Constantine. And then he said that he could just pay him the debt by giving his wife. So that's there's just all sorts of stories, but all stories don't make any sense because even when we look at this picture, so you see Agrippina, Countess von Zarnikau. So once they were married, since it was a morganatic marriage, unequal marriage, so she was a bit of a lower descent than Oldenburg because Oldenburgs were related to the Romanovs, and that's a royal family, right? But Dadiani was kind of aristocratic family, so it wasn't a bit of a kind of a bit of a mismatch. But the mesalliance wasn't really that didn't really matter that much because Oldenburg was not an heir to the throne anywhere near, wasn't even anywhere near it, so it was totally okay. And after they got married, she couldn't get the title of Oldenburg because she had been married before. So, but she was allowed to be given a title of a lower status, so Countess of Zarnikau. And when you look at this picture, you see it's written Assembly of Nobility of Georgia, 19th-20th century. So she retained her noble status. She had she been completely ignored by the state, by the court, she would have never been welcomed at anywhere. But we also seen her photographs in the big 300th anniversary party in St. Petersburg, 300th anniversary of the Romanov dynasty. And well, she wouldn't have been invited had this marriage been totally I would say disregarded by the Romanovs. So definitely not. So this is their first photograph together. She's still wearing black. You see how happy he is. You can definitely see the kind of a small little smile on his face. So he is excited. So everyone in his surroundings would say that he absolutely doted her, and they were in love. And they had children together, by the way. They had six children together. She also had a child from the previous marriage. Well, we don't know much about some of the children. Well, for example, Alexei and Nina von Zarnikau, they passed away quite early. Alexei, we know he perished during the revolution in St. Petersburg. They were not really based in Georgia. They actually moved to St. Petersburg. That's where he was based. But they were obviously they were quite frequent in Georgia, and whenever they were in Tbilisi, they would be staying in that house. However, their big manor was in Kutaisi. That's where Agrippina was from. Yeah, but there are some interesting stories and interesting connections that we can trace by looking at the two elder children, Alexandra, and also Nikolai Konstantinovich, so the daughter and the son. Well, speaking of Alexandra Konstantinovna von Zarnikau, so Konstantinovna is her patronymic name, so she was the daughter of Constantine. And Alexandra managed to immigrate to France, uh, well, just like her mom, and just like many Georgians, as you know, they didn't immigrate immediately after 1917 revolution because Georgia, well, got its independence after the Russian Empire collapsed, and for 3 years it was actually the place where a lot of Russians would escape from the revolution and kind of enjoy the free life. But after the Bolsheviks invaded, so many Georgians had to flee, especially those of an aristocratic descent. And that's exactly what happened in this case. So Alexandra Konstantinovna fled to France. She was married twice, and well, she was a beautiful woman. Took after her mother, and yes, she was a countess. So her title was totally recognized in Georgia and in by Russian nobility in exile. And she married Prince George Yurevsky. He was her first husband. And to some of you, this name may ring a bell. The thing is that Prince George Yurevsky was the son of Catherine Dolgorukova, Princess Yurevskaya, and this lady was originally a lover and then the second wife to the Russian Emperor Alexander II. That was totally mesalliance, like absolute mesalliance. It was a big scandal. I spoke a lot about it. So, and they had children together. So Ekaterina Dolgorukova and then Alexander II, they had children. But after his death, she was asked to leave the country together with the children. And well, she did that. However, they well, by the way, yeah, this is the two of the three children that they had together. So this is still the emperor, and yeah, so this story was known to everyone in the country. Everyone, I'm just, I mean it, everyone. So they were not welcomed in the court anymore. Nicholas II and Alexander III, who was the son to Alexander II, he hated the situation so much that he even threatened them just to never return to the country, and they would be receiving the financial support, but they would still bear a grudge against everyone. And when originally they married, I mean, the Yekaterina Dolgorukova, sorry, not Yekaterina, the Countess Alexandra Konstantinovna von Zarnikau, when she married the Yurevsky, well, there's a photo of them together, by the way. That's the best quality that I could find. That's also her in later years. Originally, well, that marriage was heavily criticized in Russia. I was criticized by the Russian nobility in France, and well, it actually turned out to be a very bad marriage. Um, because well, the husband Yudovsky was also an avid gambler and carried on with extorting money from Zarnikau, from Dadiani family. Because at some point Nicholas II absolutely cut down all the payouts to them, so that eventually Dolgorukova, the mother, had to blackmail them, and that worked. So they kept on getting the money. And but eventually, Katerina divorced Yurevsky and married Prince Narishkin, which, well, this is the photo. Again, the best quality I could find. They are visiting a restaurant in Paris, gala dinner. An interesting story, however, is that while she was still married to Yurevsky, um, they were seen, Yurevsky, her first husband, right, the illegitimate son of Alexander II, he was seen in the company of Prince Victor Nakashidze, who was a Georgian representative of the Georgian nobility, who was exiled from Georgia and the Russian Empire for his very anti-monarchy views. And he was suspected of several attempts to assassinate first Alexander III, and that's exactly why he was originally captured. But they couldn't connect him to the possible plots, and they just exiled him from the country just to be on the safe side. And then from Europe, he tried to hire people to assassinate Nicholas II, and he even managed to make friends with one of the people who worked in the Winter Palace, and he got this person to put poison inside the gloves of Nicholas II. And this is a story that was actually kept under the carpet for a long time. There was a story that Nicholas II actually put on those gloves, but somehow the doctors managed to save him, or the dose was not big enough. We're not sure, but the poison didn't really work. But Nicholas felt very bad for a week, and for the 10 days, he did not really make any public appearance in St. Petersburg. That was in the very, it was like in the 1900s. And well, everyone was sure it was Prince Victor Nakashidze involved. So um, it looks like Zyurevsky bared such a big grudge against Nicholas II that, well, Viktor Nakashidze tried to make connections with someone in Russia through Zyurevsky. Whether the two of them were involved in the plot, that's the question. They have not really been able to prove the connection of Zyurevsky. in his involvement in the plot, but Nakashid eventually was captured and get done with. And his brother also later on perished. But that's a different story. So that's just an interesting connection. And Alexandra, when the First World War, during the First World War, for example, uh, she served and she was in Paris already at that time. So she had been on and off and on in France, like a lot of Dadiani family. We spoke about it in the previous tours, and she settled completely in France after the revolution. But even before that, when the First World War was in full swing, she was in Paris and she even volunteered in one of the hospitals. So this is her photograph of approximately that period. And the Nikolai, we know a story about Nikolai, so it is mentioned here, by the way, that's from Wikipedia, that he married an actress and an aristocrat, Marianne von Pilstelkors. And if you watched one of my recent tours of the English embankment, then you may remember that in one of the houses, actually, I mentioned Marianne Pistelkors. Marianne Pistelkors was an actress of St. Petersburg Theater. And if you open the Wikipedia, even the Wikipedia page about her in English, that will be featured something interesting. She was suspected of to have been involved in the plot to kill Grigory Rasputin. Because as you know, Rasputin was uh, um, allured to the house of Felix Yusupov uh, because he was promised to meet Irina Yusupova, right, the wife of Felix Yusupov, and the plotters needed women's voices to make sure that, Rasputin would hear and think and assume that that was Irina. However, Yusupova herself was not in the city at that time. And there were two women that were suspected to have been involved, and one of them was Marianne von Pistelkors. She immigrated after the revolution. Everyone involved in the plot, including Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, as you know, they were spared from the revolution and they lived a long life. At that time, Pistelkors actually was the lover of Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, who was one of the plotters to kill Rasputin. And after the revolution, so she already, while living in Paris, she married the third child of Constantine of Oldenburg and Agripina Japaridze. So she got the title of Zarnikau. So Mariana von Pistelkors and Zarnikau, and then they divorced. Zarnikau, Pistelkors, sorry, she even participated in the film Song of Russia by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. I haven't seen the film yet, but she was quite a famous actress at that time, and so there were a lot of films about Russia at that point. So I think this is where we're going to wrap this up this time before I take you to the dining room with this amazing, gorgeous fireplace. We'll carry on the story about the Oldenburgs, and we'll also carry on the story of the house and the exhibit and just see this fireplace. I mean, well, there's a lot to talk about. So this is it for now. So I think I've kept my promise and shared with you at least, some bits of the story of the Zarnikau and Oldenburg family. So there are some more stories to share, but a little later. So the chat is on. Let me know if you have any questions. In 1 hour from now, I'm taking you to the Fabergé Museum, right? It will be the tour for virtual tours, the continuation of the first tour when we focused on the Imperial eggs, and this time we're going to focus on everything else other than the Imperial eggs of Fabergé, as well as the story, the fate of Karl Fabergé and his brand. there's quite a lot to talk about. And obviously, we're going to learn a bit more about the history of the palace where the museum is located. I added some more photographs to add to the old tour. Let me see the chat. Thank you, Dorley. I'm glad you liked it. Thank you so much. So I try to kind of find this balance between the Georgian story and the Oldenburg story. So, and in fact, they were not that frequent in the house anyway, because it was more of a place to stay, maybe for a week or two throughout the year. Because, as I said, whenever they were in Georgia, and they were not based in Georgia, they lived in St. Petersburg, and all the kids were raised in St. Petersburg. So but whenever they visited Georgia, they would be based in Kutaisi in the family manor, and Tbilisi was just for business. That was kind of their place for their business trips. That was it. Okay, so you have the links for tonight. For tomorrow, the English Avenue, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and the Temple Mount. That's the plan. So 6 tours for a weekend. Yeah, very light mode, I would say. Uh, as you know, I would always appreciate your support. You can send me a PayPal donation. You could buy me a coffee. On my website, you can find the links to watch the recordings for the previous weekend and including the New Year tour recording as well. And yeah, so I'm hoping, well, I haven't scheduled the next episode yet. It's been a little bit busy here. But I'm going to do it very shortly, and there are a couple more episodes to talk about, well, some legends, some more legends connected to the love story of the Oldenburg and Zarnikau, and a mysterious bedroom. Yeah, so some more legends about the house itself. Yeah, so, and some Georgian stories too. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Thank you so much for finding time to join me. I will see you soon in the Fabergé Museum and tomorrow. Bye bye.